From KLCC Studios, this is Oregon on the Record.
I'm Michael Dunn. Today is Giving Tuesday. What started as a fairly small idea to help boost donations for nonprofits has exploded into a global phenomenon with participation in 85 countries. Last year, 20 million U.S. donors gave a whopping $3.1 billion to nonprofits, which was a 15% increase over 2021. And the on-the-ground impact is huge as well. Just like the fact that Black Friday is a huge boost to retailers, Giving Tuesday not only brings in much-needed donations to nonprofits, but it also heightens awareness of organizations large and small. Today on Oregon on the Record, we'll talk to some local nonprofit leaders and experts to hear from them how Giving Tuesday helps support their mission, but also to hear about the state of the nonprofit community and how it has evolved into one of the most important sectors of our local economy. The last few years have been tough, but this resilient sector has been more than up to the challenge. Nonprofits in the U.S. spend nearly $1 trillion annually for goods and services ranging from large expenses like medical equipment for nonprofit hospitals to everyday purchases such as office supplies, food, utility, and rent. In Oregon, more than 12% of all employment is in the nonprofit sector. Today on Oregon on the Record, you'll hear from nonprofit leaders and experts about how they're doing in this most unusual economy. For many, the years from 2012 to 2019 saw tremendous growth in giving for their organization. But then, of course, COVID hit. Now, some are hitting their stride, and their creative strategies they learned during the pandemic are helping them to deliver more services than ever before. On this show, you'll hear from development directors, executive directors, and consultants who are implementing new and innovative programs to both improve their funding, but also improve the ways they deliver vital services to their constituencies. First, you'll hear from a consultant who's helped many of our community's signature nonprofits do everything from fund multi-million-dollar facilities to develop a robust digital fundraising presence. Christina Lund, principal of Lund Development Solutions, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You are plugged into the nonprofit community. You've helped many of them, many signature nonprofits with capital campaigns and other important strategies that they do. I kind of wanted to check in with you about on this Giving Tuesday, from your perspective as a professional consultant, what does Giving Tuesday mean to the nonprofit community? Specifically around their fundraising plans for the remainder of the year to finish out strong or for, setting things up for the next year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you probably already know, Giving Tuesday is a sort of a global movement. It was started in the U.S. in 2012, but it's become this huge global initiative around bringing the average person together, right, to create social impact. And prior to 2012, if you remember, we had 3 or 4 years of tough economic times after October of 2008.
Sure.
And nonprofits were looking for new innovative ways to implement fundraising strategies. The fundraising world had changed dramatically, and they needed sort of a new, fresh look at things. Giving Tuesday did a couple of different things. It energized the base of many nonprofits in a way where they could come in small amounts, $10, $5, even. I even saw one campaign in 2014 that was, a quarter, 25 cents. So they grew their base, they solidified their base, and they engaged their base in a way that they hadn't done before. It also encouraged people to there was a sort of a movement at that time, random acts of kindness. Do you remember that?
Sure.
So it was a way to perform sort of this simple act of kindness in your community by giving. And with the advent of online giving that happened right about that same time, it played into sort of the ability for people with their smartphones to give small amounts of money in tandem with many other people to create sort of lasting impact and perform these sort of simple acts of kindness either in their community or globally. GoFundMe, if you remember, sort of really got its head of steam during that same time.
Wow. Okay. Sure.
It also caught fire beyond the U.S. Now, today, I think more than 80 countries participate in Giving Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
So it also created this opportunity for people to give internationally, right, in places that they maybe had an interest in, or but didn't know about before, or maybe in an area that they were interested in but didn't know exactly how to reach a specific nonprofit or charitable cause.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big difference. And then it also lended a lot of credibility. Right. So you don't actually have to sign up for Giving Tuesday. Any organization can take advantage of the movement, the initiative, if you will. But what it did is it allowed a lot of charities to actually set up pages and sort of legitimize themselves. And people became very familiar and comfortable with giving either on social media or online in a way that they hadn't before. So it was honestly, Giving Tuesday is sort of a game changer. Really, along, if you start thinking about how much money, generally speaking, is given worldwide in Giving Tuesday.
So Christina, what you just described, obviously there's a lot of strategy, a lot of creativity around that. And so I kind of wanted to get your read on, in addition to what you just described and in your role as a consultant, can you kind of talk about some of the ways that nonprofits are becoming even more strategic, even more creative in terms of donations, soliciting donations, in terms of capital campaigns, and in terms of ways in which they fund their purpose and to be able to continue the work that they do in the community?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. This is a fast-moving train. Philanthropy is a fast-moving train right now. Nonprofits are doing a better job than they ever have of meeting the donor where they're at. So, and that can look like a lot of different things. Every nonprofit, of course, is different, just like every other organization has a different financial model, if you will.
Okay.
But what I would say is generally, as organizations look to meet their donors where their donors best want to intersect their passion and their generosity, they're also simultaneously trying to make it as easy as possible for those donors to give, to see the impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then to be able to exit the circle of giving, or stay in the circle of giving, or stay on the periphery of the circle of giving, wherever they're most comfortable. And so Giving Tuesday is obviously an initiative, a fundraising initiative that happens at the end of the year, which is sort of the golden hour of giving. It's when majority of all giving happens. But every organization looks at their donor base and where they can bring them into that donor family. And then they decide what are all of those areas where we can bring people in. And so sometimes that has to do with events. It can be a grant writing. It can be a major donor campaign. It could be a capital campaign. It can be collaboration with other nonprofits or for-profits. It could be corporate sponsorship, lots of different areas. But one of the fastest growing areas is actually in online fundraising, with heavy reliance on social media and special initiatives like Giving Tuesday, email marketing, and very focused email promotion.
Okay.
So kind of gone are the days of receiving everything in paper format. Digital format is very quickly taking over. I'm not saying paper has gone away by any means.
Okay.
But we're utilizing QR codes. We're reaching people via text. We're utilizing peer-to-peer, giving lots of new innovative fundraising that meets that donor where they're at and where they need to be and will see the most impact.
Christina, my last question for you is sort of, obviously, Giving Tuesday comes at the end of the year. And so, looking forward into 2024, what are you kind of interested in seeing in the sector, in the nonprofit sector throughout our community? What are maybe it's innovation, maybe it's kind of bracing for the uncertainty of our economic situation that we still don't know what's going to look like. We're heading towards a presidential year. Maybe if you could just kind of, what are the things you are looking to see over the next 12 months?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll be clear in saying that I'm not a wealth strategist. I'm not a CPA, an attorney, and I'm certainly not an economist.
Sure.
But I am sort of in the trenches of fundraising day in and day out. And and there's a lot of consistencies over time in fundraising. And one of those consistencies is that, roughly 1/4 of all giving for nonprofits happens in the last month of the year.
Okay.
And almost 40% of all giving happens in the last quarter of the year. So when we talk about golden hour of giving, right, that it's certainly true. This year is unlike many other years. We had 12 years of sort of a bull market of charitable giving year over year, dramatic increases in philanthropy and generosity. It was absolutely marvelous. But coming out of the pandemic, for many different reasons, economic perceptions and inflation and interest rates and the closing out of stimulus payments and all sorts of things, we saw a pretty dramatic decrease in charitable giving towards the end of last year and the first 6 months of this year. And while it's starting to turn around and people's perceptions are changing, people's portfolios have started to they've built back up, I think you're going to see a dramatic increase in giving in the last 45 days of this year.
Okay.
So nonprofits, right, are competing for those dollars. I hate to say that because I don't want fundraising to become a competition. We should always be collaborating with each other.
Sure.
But to that end, they do need to innovate, to use your term. They do need to stand out. They do need to share the impact of what they're doing. And so using strategies like Giving Tuesday is an excellent way to shine a light. Giving Tuesday is not actually just on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. It actually runs for 5 days. So Giving Tuesday in that 5 days, while it may seem a little frenzied, it's a marvelous opportunity to shine a light on that organization's impact at a time when people are focused on charitable giving.
Got it. Well, Christina Lund, principal of Lund Development Solutions, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Michael Dunn, and you're listening to Oregon on the Record from KLCC and our show about Giving Tuesday. Our next guest is the Resource Development Director for our local United Way, and she sees a nonprofit sector that's making its way back from the pandemic. Alma Fumiko Jesus, who is the Vice President of Resource Development for the United Way of Lane County, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Obviously, nonprofits, like every other sector in our economy and our community, has gone through so much in the last few years. And I kind of wanted to, from your perspective, maybe give us a little bit about how you feel like the health of the sector is in our community right now. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the ways you've seen the nonprofit sector, including your own, overcome the challenges of COVID, inflation, supply chain, labor issues, all the big things that you've had to, hurdles in front of you on your race to provide value and resources to your constituents.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that I have seen, and so in my role, I get to go and, I feel like I'm a community builder. So I have this fancy title, but really it just means I get to go and connect with the community, both the nonprofit folks, business folks, just everyone out in our community and learn a little bit more about what needs are. And what I'm seeing coming back, yes, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of challenges. And I think folks are looking for more connection, more ways to get involved, more ways to connect. So business businesses are looking for getting their staff involved. The world has changed, right? We have hybrid, ways to come to work. We're not all together in a space. And one of the things that I see is that we are understanding the level of need in our community even more. And the need to collaborate and get together and work together is one of the things that I think the nonprofit sector is really helping our community do. So there's so much division in the world, right? But I mean, really, the reality is there's no one person or one organization that's going to solve the complex challenges that are happening around us. And I think that's the thing I really appreciate about the nonprofit sector is there's so many of us here in Lane County. I think I've heard the stat per capita. Lane County has the most nonprofits in any county in the nation, which means there's a lot of folks that want to do great work. And I think it's really important for us to remember, how do we come together and work together to solve these problems as a community?
Yeah. I think perhaps people who aren't in the nonprofit sector, it's important to realize, like, for example, with lockdowns during COVID, important events like galas and those major fundraising things, they suddenly went away. And so I know a lot of nonprofits quickly, kind of pivoted to online events and so on and so forth. But I think it kind of speaks to this idea of being really creative in terms of fundraising, in terms of service delivery. Talk a little bit about, as you said, you get a chance to really kind of take the pulse of nonprofits as well as the community. Talk a little bit about maybe some of those creative ways that you saw nonprofits, both during COVID, but even coming out of it. Maybe some of those strategies, proved that they could last even in normal times, whatever that is. Talk a little bit about that idea of creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, and I'm clearly very biased. I will say that. But my life was in the for-profit world before coming into the nonprofit world.
Okay.
And what I did see is that folks were nimble. That's one of the things about the nonprofit community. It's you figure out what to do with the resources that you have, and you find very creative ways to solve problems. And so one of the things, for example, as you said, like there were galas, we were getting together in person. Organizations had the paper forms that people would fill out, and then you pick up those forms. And well, how do you do that? When we're at home and we're not allowed to touch each other and see each other and fill out touch pencils and pens, And so I did see, I forgot who coined this term. It was one of our wonderful folks that volunteer with us, but the silver lining in the COVID cloud. And what we saw was folks embrace technology. I mean, because we had to, right? We had to learn Zoom. We had to learn all these things. So what I've seen coming out of this is that a lot of folks are still continuing, and it's helped them save, like the cost savings for many organizations, many nonprofits, for the donors as well. Being able to utilize technology more has been, and it's kind of like, you're like, well, obviously, but we just forget about the things that we are able to do when we have to be nimble and we have to pivot. So some of those things came out of that. And then I think about the creativity. A lot of our folks, when we couldn't get together, one of our organizations in town that United Way works with, they did this talent show. And so they sent videos in, and the energy of what happened during the pandemic when, in the early parts of it where we were all able to come together, that energy and that drive is still there with our community. And so what I believe the nonprofit community is really trying to do is just to keep that reminder that, we are better when we are together. We are stronger when we're working together. And that's really, I think, what's come out of the pandemic. And I mean, honestly, that's the thing that makes me excited about Giving Tuesday. This is a day for us to all come together. And, we're all in different places. And there's a lot of challenges and things right now, but just learning about what's happening in our community, to me, that's the most important thing. You might not be able to give your time, talent, or treasure, but just learn a little bit more about what's happening. Learn about a nonprofit that you might be one that you've not learned about before. And so there's a lot of things that you can do on Giving Tuesday to kind of, and I kind of think that the full circle, that's a great question because it brings it back full circle to me of what we learned during the pandemic was coming together. And that's a big thing about Giving Tuesday.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I love the word you used, nimble. And I want to kind of use that to, maybe it's two questions at once, but kind of, talk a little bit about the people who run nonprofits, the staffers, especially how maybe their jobs have changed a little bit, overcoming those challenges. And then maybe if you could do a little bit of myth busting, because I know that a lot of times And I also, know a lot about the private sector, and you're well positioned to talk about it. Sometimes there's myths around the professionalism or the talent of people in the nonprofit sector. Talk about those employees, both, the mythology to get away with that or to do away with that, but then also talk about some of the ways they've evolved in this crazy time we've lived in.
Oh my goodness, that's one of my favorite topics. I have seen, again, very lucky to have been here in Lane County. I think I'm approaching nearly 30 years being in this community, and worked in many different areas. And some of the talent that I see, I look at my work and others as well, other nonprofits, but there are so many talented people, highly educated people coming through these doors, and it's because it's an opportunity to, we get really caught up in like, oh, nonprofit work that's the work of good work. We're doing good work. And some of the mythology on the other side too, because I do believe that for-profit organizations can still do good work, right?
Sure.
But we get caught up, like, as you said, in the mythology of professionals go here and they go into this industry or that industry in the for-profit sector. And then folks that are kind of like, I'm Birkenstocks and we're, we don't care how our hair is all wild and stuff, which is me all the time anyway. But there's this sense of that. But I have seen one of the things that I know that's happening in the nonprofit sector, and I kind of answer both of your questions, that we have talented folks that are there, and oftentimes there's a lot of turnover in general, but especially from our nonprofit sectors, because we have those talented folks that are coming and getting to understand an issue or a challenge, and they're taking that knowledge and they are moving into another sector or another industry or another organization, which is to me a testament to the folks in the nonprofit sector, right? That, I joke that people are looking at staff listings in nonprofits and saying, ooh, I'm going to check that person out and send them a job description, which again, I'm like, we are all in an ecosystem sharing our knowledge. But that's one of the things that I think that there's a big disconnect, because the nonprofit sector is a sector. It's a sector in our community that's filling gaps. Because we all, again, we're an ecosystem and we all have a role. So the nonprofit sector is filling gaps that would not be getting taken care of if we didn't exist. I would love for the work that, like, for us to be obsolete. That would be lovely, but that's not the reality.
Sure.
So, we just a lot of talented people coming through the doors.
Yeah. And the other thing too, and you mentioned about just the sheer volume, the number of nonprofits in our community, which bespeaks not just a lot of people doing a lot of good things. That's an economic powerhouse, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the so I firmly believe that if we, to the point of busting myths, if we looked at the nonprofit sector with a different lens, not assuming that they're doing this and it doesn't matter, and they can take $1 and they can turn that into 10, because I'm like, that's magical, and it's actually not realistic too. Because if the nonprofit sector could turn $1 into $10, then the for-profit sector should be looking at it that way too, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's a huge economic opportunity if we look at our nonprofit sectors. And again, coming back to all of us working together, if we're able to work together collectively and think about how does each of our organizations, each of our sectors, each of the areas that we work in come together to solve these complex issues, like we can bring more money into our community. We can grow that. It's a really big part of economic development, right?
Yeah.
And I would say, instead of us fighting over pieces of the pie, like, let's make the pie bigger, and that means bringing money into our community, bringing resources into our community. But it takes all of us working together, regardless of what sector you're in.
Sure. Alma, my last question for you is this. I think as you eloquently talked about sort of the professionalism of staff and of nonprofits, I've seen, and I want you to get your read on this too, in the last, decade, 20 years, something like that, I think another thing that nonprofits have done a good job of, that maybe they didn't do as good a job a couple decades ago, is the idea of really effectively communicating the value proposition of what they do. I think in some of that mythology we talked about earlier was, 20 years ago, it might have been, I'll write a check to a nonprofit and they might go off and do something good, but I may not necessarily know about it. And I wanted to get your read on that, idea of, wait a second, let me tell you what your dollars, what your efforts did in the community to make it better.
Absolutely. Again, that's a huge question, and I think part of it is part of like you said, the mythology, but also the how we view nonprofits, right? It was I'm doing my work and I'm gonna give you some money and you go and figure it out. And again, part of it was there was a need for that maybe in the past, and that was how it was structured. But really, right now, it's important for all of us to kind of have an understanding of the issues, and especially as issues kind of bubble up and we see them more and more. So being able to communicate that need. Communicate why, how that is impacting the community. And part of it is because our donors, we don't just want money from our donors. We want them to understand the issues. So it's more than just giving money to someone and that's going to solve the problem. It's like understanding the complexity so that we can also be ambassadors for the work. And yeah, like, so I think about when I came to do an informational interview with with United Way, I was asked, what do you know of United Way? And I said, you're big and you do good things. I was like, I honestly am not sure. I know the brand, great brand.
Yeah.
But as I got into it, I was able to learn more and also really see that the goal is to help people understand the impact that not only, again, time, talent, and treasure, but understand the issue and the problem. Because the goal would be if we can get ahead of these things, if we can get upstream and prevent things from happening in the first place, we can use that money for something else, for more arts and more, more just other things that we would love to become obsolete. And I'm thinking specifically of the social services sector.
Sure.
If we can get ahead of those problems, then, it'll be a much better place and our money can go into other areas.
Well said. Well, Alma Fumiku Jesus, who's the Vice President of Resource Development for United Way of Lane County, really appreciate you coming in on this Giving Tuesday and talking to us.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
I'm Michael Dunn, and this is Oregon on the Record on KLCC. Up next, you'll hear from a woman who wants to both amplify the voice and expand the reach of Lane County's African American community. Talisha Brown, the founder and executive director of the Black Cultural Initiative. Thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Maybe for those of our listeners who may not know, talk about the Black Cultural Initiative and all that it oversees.
Yeah, the Black Cultural Initiative, we're a newer nonprofit in town. I like to call us the new kid on the block, so to speak. We just got our 501c3 in June of this year. Yay!
Nice.
And for a number of years, we actually have been organizing and promoting the Black Cultural Festival. We're now in our third annual Black Cultural Festival, which happens in August every year at Alton Baker Park in Eugene, Oregon. And it's a really fantastic celebration. But more recently, in March, we purchased a 2-story office building at 1695 Jefferson Street, and we are starting up the People's Collective.
Tell us about the mission of the People's Collective.
Yeah, the mission of the People's Collective is really to create a connected and healthy space for Black people locally. So we're a cultural gathering space. We're a Black business incubator. We're welcoming in startup businesses and nonprofits. We are have a lounge and a meeting gathering space, affinity space for our community members, offering business services, financial literacy, economic development, health and mental health services for our community members.
Great. What was the genesis for starting all of this? What did you kind of see in the community that was lacking, and you said, if not me, then who, kind of a thing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. For years, I had been wanting to just be a part of a healthy and robust Black community locally. And I'd been talking with friends and, just kind of pitting our heads. And finally, what really came was that my friend, my dear friend, Kokai Nosokere, he wanted to host a public speaking engagement for his books and do a Pacific Northwest book signing tour. I approached him and I said, hey, do you want me to host this event for you at Alton Baker Park in August of 2020? He said yes. It was called The History of Black Nationalism, and it really focused on Marcus Garvey and other freedom fighters in our movement and in our history. And so, really a movement was born. Basically, we had, it was in the middle of lockdown. We had 100 people showing up, and I was really amazed by the energy, the enthusiasm for Black people gathering together. And so then we created what is now the Black Cultural Festival, the first annual, the following year. It's really quite amazing to see the growth of this community event.
Did that surprise you? I mean, Eugene is sort of known for a lot of different things, but certainly it's known as a pretty white community. And I'm curious, were there challenges of running a BIPOC organization, and were you surprised by how much people resonated? I went to the festival last year, and I thought, wow, this is a really huge gathering. Were you surprised by sort of the I don't know, the kind of the participation in the community?
Yeah, when I talk to arts and cultural groups, right, they talk about Eugene being a place where people come to experience arts and culture. And I say, yeah, for everyone except for Black people, like what Black person would come to Eugene to experience arts and culture. So there's a market there that we're just not tapping into, that we're just not aware of. And that is changing. There's a lot of organizations, a lot of entities in this community that's really changing it. But, for years, I was actually traveling to Tennessee, to Arkansas, to Chicago, to California, anywhere to experience my own culture. And so to be able to experience that, to be able to be in spaces, safe spaces, where we see people who look like us is really important. Initially, I was kind of shocked. I was like, wow, this is amazing that this is happening here. I'm just really so excited that I don't have to travel in order to be with my own people, that we are currently creating that space, and the festival and the center are those spaces where people can gather.
Talk about building this, and maybe through the lens of, nonprofits oftentimes have to be extremely creative in order to fundraise, in order to attract staff, in order to build on an initial idea. Talk about that. Talk about you're going through a capital campaign. You purchased a building. Talk about the ways in which you were able to do all that. Especially, let's be honest. So much of this is happening, in the shadow of the last few years, which have been anything but normal with regard to COVID and with regard to the economy and inflation. How has it been?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I'm a really naturally very creative person, and I love to do grassroots work. I love to see what is out there, and through, a lot of careful consideration, meditation, prayer, really ask, like, what is the best way forward? And also bringing in my community, very, very much so. And so it's been a really fun process for me of discovery of, there has been a history of separation, a history of fragmentation, a history of racism in this local community that still, we still feel that history today, right? It's not yesterday's history. We are feeling it today. Sure. And so it's really exciting to see, how do we want to develop our community for tomorrow? To imagine children growing up in a really different environment, a really different climate. And that's what's happening. It's pretty amazing seeing, children experiencing the festival for the first time and not having known that festival, that experience wasn't available before. So it is interesting times, with COVID, having an office building. We are very creative in how we fundraise and how we create the resources. But really, it's not just about us. It's about that this community has been dying to have an offering like this for years, for decades. And the amount of community pouring in of volunteers and donations and grants and foundations, really supporting this work is really important and really points to how much this work has been needed in our local community.
Yeah. My last question for you is this: we're speaking on Giving Tuesday, and so that's been this fairly recent phenomenon of kind of tacking off of Black Friday and spend on holidays. It's more about what you can do with some of your discretionary income to help fund nonprofits or organizations in our community. Do you have a message for people listening about, that idea of looking to support organizations such as yours and the impact that it can provide to a community?
Yeah, Giving Tuesday is really an interesting cultural phenomenon, and I really love the idea of taking our dollars out of capitalism and out of corporate gain and putting it into the hands of the people. And that's exactly what our campaign, our capital campaign, is about, is putting it into the hands of the people. So the projects that we're going to work on for our capital campaign this time around is basically putting in a basic stove and refrigerator in our kitchen so that we can host community gatherings and people can share food, with other people, with our community members, basically updating electrical systems and insulating our garage, which has become our lounge space for youth and for other groups in the community. So it's really, I think about giving as, in order to get something, sometimes we have to give. And sometimes the best way to give is from our heart and freely. And so we just ask that whatever people give, that feels good to them.
Good enough. Well, Talisha Brown, the founder and executive director of the Black Cultural Initiative, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
I'm Michael Dunn, and you're listening to Oregon on the Record from KLCC and our show about Giving Tuesday. Our last guest is with Ophelia's Place, whose mission is to ensure that all girls in our community will be safe, valued, and empowered. Jennifer Monaghan, the development director for Ophelia's Place, as well as the board chair from the Emerald Valley Development Professionals Association. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, talk about Ophelia's Place. Talk about sort of how did it come to be? What was the problem that the organization saw, or the founders, if you will, saw in the community and said, we need to step in here?
So the founder of Ophelia's Place is Rosaria Hogland. And Rosaria was deeply involved in Women's Space, which is now known as Hope and Safety Alliance. Yep. And what she saw was people coming who were experiencing domestic violence, and she realized that maybe there needed to be a way to educate and empower youth before they graduated and found themselves in these really harmful situations. Of course, domestic violence can happen to anyone,
sure,
regardless of family support, socioeconomic levels. But that's where she saw a need. And so she decided to start this prevention-based organization for girls 10 to 18 using therapy, after-school programs, in-school programs. We also offer education for adults on what it means when we're talking about, body positivity, adultism, and just making sure that girls really had a safe place to go to kind of stop the cycle before it began.
Sure. So talk about what happens at Ophelia's Place now.
Okay, so Ophelia's Place is really quite comprehensive. So back in 2012, my daughter, who is now 25, was one of the initial participants in an in-school support program that they were piloting at Briggs Middle School. So that is one of the ways, and that really impacted her going forward, and is also why I got involved with Ophelia's Place. And so Ophelia's Place does a wide spectrum of things. We have drop-in after school. We have these support groups in school programs. So girls who, may be identified as struggling, or girls who just need more support, they can come to these programs. We have really cool calendar of activities. We're getting ready to go into our winter season. Our fall season is starting to wrap up. So we have things we have maker space. So girls come in weekly and have all these cool crafts that they can do. In our Junction City location, we have STEM projects that happen. In our Albany location, we have bilingual, really heavily bilingual services because there's a heavier Latin population up in Albany. So we have a really wide array. We do classroom presentations. So those are obviously for everyone, not just girls and girl identifying youth and non-binary youth. We have the Young Amazing Women of Color group. We have groups that are specific for queer space. Okay. So we have a really wide variety of the services that we offer. And we're getting away from being prevention-based because that makes people think that we're only for girls who are potentially going into crisis. Okay. And we really want to let everybody know that Ophelia's Place is for any girl identifying youth. Because we do have really exciting programs and we have parental education too. So it's not just, I'm having a problem, I'm struggling, Ophelia's Place is where I can go. It's, I'm a girl and I'm looking for some way to get involved in things that maybe I wouldn't otherwise be involved of. I'm looking for a community, and that's where Ophelia's Place really steps in.
We live in an unstable world, an unstable nation, an unstable community. And so kind of putting on your hat as a development director, and certainly it's well known that there are a lot of nonprofits in Lane County. And so I want to kind of dive into sort of, the creativity that's necessary to raise funds to keep the doors open. Because I imagine it's not only an incredibly difficult challenge, but it's probably gotten more difficult, especially when you factor in the challenges of the pandemic and, rising inflation and, difficulty finding people for jobs. How has it been and how you had to kind of overcome those challenges?
It has been a challenge. During the pandemic, it was really interesting because we saw a huge increase in giving. People were receiving stimulus checks that didn't need those stimulus checks. And so at the time I was at Food for Lane County, we saw a huge increase in giving. That was across the board. Nonprofits were seeing funding coming in. There were government agencies throwing money at nonprofits because in that moment of the pandemic, everybody really understood the importance of the nonprofits here in Lane County and nationwide. Lane County does have one of the highest populations of nonprofits. I believe we have the second highest population of nonprofits in Oregon. Wow. It's really incredible. So there's a lot of competition for dollars. Sure. During the pandemic, I won't speak for everybody, a lot of nonprofits saw an increase in their donations. Now we're seeing the opposite. Now what's happening is galas, which are very popular, galas are not seeing as much in return. They're not seeing as high of donations. I just saw something today where a lot of times on appeal letters, the direct mail asks, there will be a range of giving, and those ranges of giving are customized to the donor. So they'll say, the mid-level is, say the person gives you $50 usually. So then what'll happen is you'll have a range to select, like, give us 35, give us 60, give us 75. So there'll be a stretch goal and a lower end. Okay. Usually you see those median gifts come in. Now we're seeing a trend where it's the lower end that's getting picked. Okay. So that's really reflecting what's happening in the economy, the uncertainty about inflation, what's going to happen. Of course, we're going into an election year, so that's going to have an impact. So people are really starting to think creatively. Peer-to-peer fundraising is a big deal. The fundraisers that you see on Facebook. Okay. The problem with Facebook fundraisers is the nonprofits don't get the donor information. Oh. So those become a one-time donation that there's no follow-up. There are other ways that you can do fundraisers like that for your favorite nonprofit that will allow you to get donor information. And I know that people sometimes are like, well, I don't want to get on a mailing list because I'm just giving because my friend's raising money for us. Okay. But the idea is if you care enough to give, we want to capture that information. So peer-to-peer fundraising is a creative way people are working, but the return on that going forward is not as great. Okay. Giving Tuesdays here. Yep. And the thing with Giving Tuesday is that started as a social media campaign. Okay. It's really difficult to raise money on Giving Tuesday because it's a social media campaign. Not a lot of people are comfortable giving through social media. People don't want to, they see, especially here in Lane County, if you follow 20 of your nonprofits here, they see all 20 people asking for money. How do you choose? Sure. So what I did last year was I did an email campaign. Okay. And that was highly successful. So we'll be doing that again this year. And for a day that I've seen revenue raised if you're lucky, like $1,500, which is a lot of staff time when you think about that amount of money.
Sure.
Last year, an email campaign, it was sent out 3 times in the day, and it raised $26,000.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because you're getting a direct ask instead of just a passive ask on social media. That's really easy to ignore.
Sure. It's interesting listening to you talk, and I'm realizing, and I know that you've worked at other nonprofits too, like Food for Lane County. What you just described is in many ways the fruits of labor of a much more professional staff at the nonprofit level. I want you to talk about that a little bit about, it could be 20 years ago, you probably didn't have, or maybe you didn't necessarily use some of the analytics you've been talking about or that one-to-one fundraising. And a lot of times there's a bit of a mythology about, nonprofit people are just, they're do-gooders, but they're not necessarily business people. And that's really kind of a myth, isn't it?
It is really a myth, and it's an unfortunate myth because one of the things that I've gotten asked, I've been in nonprofit work for 17 years in the development field, and one of the things that people often like to say to me is, well, why do you get paid? And that's a very common question as staff of nonprofit is, why do you get paid? And it is for that exact reason. You need professional people to be able to run a business, because while nonprofits are doing good, and they run on donations, they are still a business providing a service in the community, and really important services in the community.
Yeah.
So it's a shift that we need to make in the way we think about nonprofits and the way we think about nonprofit staff. Nonprofit staff is underpaid. A lot of us could make more money if we went into the for-profit industries than working in the nonprofit world. Part of it is we do feel like we need to make a difference. I feel like this is my calling. This is what I've been doing. I can't imagine not doing it. But we are professionals and we are skilled at what we do. And we do use analytics. Like you said, we have a staff person at Ophelia's Place, and their position is doing analytics, looking at how our programs are impacting the people we serve. How many people are coming? How many people are being successful? What does this look like? Creating waiting lists for therapy, because we offer therapy services, which are highly in need right now.
Sure.
And that's a really important position, because when you're talking to grantors, they want to know analytics. Yeah. They want to know, what impact are you having? And if you don't have staff who has the skill and knowledge to create those analytics, that already puts you in a position to not be as well suited to receive those grants over somebody who does have a larger development staff. Development staff's really important. And it's important because without development staff, you aren't able to generate the funds and have the programming that you need.
Yeah. Jennifer, my last question for you, and I know that, Giving Tuesday, sometimes the results are great, sometimes they're not. But if you had sort of a message for people and use Giving Tuesday as maybe that linchpin of, hey, if you have the resources, consider X.
I would say on Giving Tuesday, if you have the resources, give what is comfortable to you. That's going to be different for everybody. A lot of people like to say, the cost of a cup of coffee. Well, for me, I can buy a cup of coffee 5 days in the week. So for me, that would be a $25 donation. Also, on Giving Tuesday, if you have the ability, look at signing up to become a monthly donor. Monthly donations are something that often get overlooked. At Ophelia's Place, we have the OP Society. And what that allows is you can say, I'm going to commit to a $20 bank donation that comes out of my account every single month. Well, you do $20 a month, I'm going to have to do math.
That's okay. It's about $120 a year.
It's about $140 a year.
Exactly.
If you give $100 a month, that's $1,200 a year. So while it doesn't seem like a lot in the moment, I know that, my Netflix is going up to $22.99 a month. I just got that notification. Well, I could cancel Netflix. I don't watch that much on it. And I could turn around and donate that monthly to a nonprofit. And that would make a huge difference for those places. That makes a huge difference. Every nonprofit has a different budget. We all have different goals that we have to meet. But those sustaining donations, starting those on Giving Tuesday is huge, because that's money that we know is going to come in monthly.
Absolutely. Well, Jennifer Monaghan, the Development Director for Ophelia's Place, as well as the Board Chair of the Emerald Valley Development Professionals Association, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for highlighting this really important information on Giving Tuesday. And if you feel inclined, go to your local nonprofit's webpage and start giving today.
That's the show for this Giving Tuesday. Giving Tuesday is in many ways the Super Bowl and World Series for nonprofit fundraisers. Not only does this day contribute a huge amount to their bottom line, this global program promotes the good of nonprofits unlike any other day. For many of our local nonprofits, this Giving Tuesday is both a way to secure their mission for another year, but to also highlight how critical the sector is for every aspect of our community. I want to thank my guests for coming on the show and talking with us. Christina Lund of Lund Development Solutions, Alma Fumiku Jesus of the United Way of Lane County, Talisha Brown from the Black Cultural Initiative, and Jennifer Monaghan of Ophelia's Place. This show, along with all episodes of Oregon on the Record, is available at klcc.org. I'm Michael Dunn, and this has been Oregon on the Record from KLCC. Thanks for listening.